When the battlefield fell silent and the cannons stopped their roar, the true terror was just beginning. For the men who fought and lost, the end came quickly, either by the sword or the chains of slavery. But for their wives, the wives of the vanquished warriors, survival was not a triumph. It was a slow, agonizing descent into a living nightmare. What the Ottomans did to these women was not random violence or the chaos of a battlefield. It was a calculated system, a bureaucracy of cruelty so profound that survival itself became a form of punishment. We're about to uncover how the Ottoman Empire perfected a horrifying machine that turned captured women into commodities, stripping them of their identity and dignity. Forget the chaotic scenes of pillaging and lawlessness you've seen in the movies. The Ottoman Empire had a different, far more chilling approach. They had a name for these captured women, the sabaya, a term from Islamic jurisprudence for the spoils of war. This was not lawlessness, it was the law itself. Every act of dehumanization was meticulously codified, organized, and written into the very machinery of the empire. It was a system that transformed human beings into numbers in a ledger. Before we delve into the dark truth of their torment, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next descent into history's darkest corners. The process of dehumanization began the very moment the cities fell. Specialized Ottoman officers, not soldiers, entered the conquered lands with one mission: to sort the captured people with ruthless precision. Men, women, and children were separated like livestock. The wives of the fallen, once noble ladies with names and status, were forced into degrading inspections. Ottoman doctors and officials would examine them from head to toe, scrutinizing their teeth, their bodies, and calculating their fertility. Their age, beauty, and perceived health determined their price. Young women with striking features were marked for Constantinople, while others, older or less striking, were condemned to a life of heavy labor or discarded into obscurity. This wasn't just an inspection. It was a meticulously planned industry of humiliation, where a woman's worth was shouted out like a number and her body prodded in the open streets for all to see. The physical nightmare was only just beginning. The captured women were forced to march for weeks in long columns, chained together. Many collapsed from hunger and exhaustion, left to die on the roadside, forgotten. The lucky ones were crammed into wagons like sacks of grain. Survival was no guarantee, and reaching the slave markets alive was already a bitter triumph. But what awaited them was a fate even worse. The Ottoman slave markets were not some hidden, lawless dens. They were official, government-regulated institutions in major cities like Constantinople, Bursa, and Ankara, where human beings were treated as nothing more than taxable goods. In these markets, women were lined up for inspection under the eyes of eager buyers. Buyers were given free rein to touch, examine, and even test the women before making an offer. A woman's skills, sewing, cooking, weaving, were put on degrading display like tools at a stall. If she failed to impress, she could be beaten or have her price slashed. Every ounce of dignity was systematically crushed. The humiliation was the very point of the system. Women were forced to smile under threat, to show obedience, to act as though they had already accepted their fate. Behind them, scribes recorded everything: names, origins, ages, values, filling Ottoman archives with ledgers of misery. For the most beautiful captives, the darkest fate awaited them: the Ottoman harems. Forget the myths of silk, luxury, and forbidden romance. The harem was nothing more than a gilded cage, a prison wrapped in gold, designed for one purpose: the systematic annihilation of identity. Inside the Topkapi Palace, thousands of women from every conquered land were held in confinement, competing for survival under the watchful eyes of eunuch guards. Their names, their faith, and their entire past were stripped away. A Christian woman from Hungary or Greece would be woken up one morning with a new Islamic name, forced to learn Ottoman Turkish and adopt new religious rituals. Refusal meant starvation, whipping, or isolation in blackened cells. It was not just sexual exploitation, it was a form of psychological annihilation. Women were forced into a vicious competition for scraps of influence, knowing that favoritism could mean survival, while rejection could lead to abuse or death. Many women never adapted. They descended into madness, and some, in utter desperation, took their own lives. This was not paradise. It was a graveyard for identity. But there was an even more sinister layer to this cruelty. For the wives of important men, the torment was intentionally sharpened. They were often forced to serve the very officers who had destroyed their families. Their degradation was a public spectacle. a message to every conquered community. If the noble women of your land can be broken, no one is safe. Resistance was not just futile, it was a path to even greater humiliation. Every detail of their suffering, their origin, skills, beauty, and price was meticulously recorded by imperial scribes, transforming human misery into a bureaucratic ledger, a cold, official documentation of horror. The Ottoman machine did not stop at mere enslavement. It went further. It weaponized the women's wombs to produce the next generation of slaves. Any child born to an enslaved mother was automatically the property of the master. Mothers were forced to raise children they could never truly call their own, knowing the empire could rip them away at any moment to be sold into the janissary system as soldiers or servants. The womb became just another tool of exploitation. Religion was also turned into a weapon of dominance. Captive Christian women were dragged into forced conversions. Ceremonies that had nothing to do with faith and everything to do with domination. Refusal meant torture. Acceptance meant the final severing of ties to their families, their culture, and their entire past. This act made escape meaningless. Even if a woman ran, she could never go back home. She had been erased, legally and spiritually. This was how the Ottomans ensured that conquest was permanent. The battlefield might have lasted for weeks, but the fate of these women stretched for generations. Their bodies becoming extensions of the empire's power and their identities systematically obliterated. But what if I told you that being sold into a harem or an Ottoman household was not the worst fate? Some women face punishment so calculated, so sadistic, that even the empire's own records struggled to describe them. When cities resisted too long or commanders defied the sultan, their wives were singled out. The empire turned them into living warnings, using their bodies as a canvas for a public display of power. Captured women were dragged through the streets, chained, beaten, and displayed before their conquered communities. Their humiliation was not a private matter, it was official policy. A commander's wife might be stripped of her clothing and paraded before the very soldiers who had slaughtered her family, her body becoming a banner of defeat. Then came branding, hot irons pressed against their skin, burning symbols into their flesh, not to mark ownership, but to erase their dignity. Noble women, once seated beside kings, were made to clean the floors of Ottoman barracks. Wives of military leaders were made to serve wine to the officers who butchered their husbands. The torment didn't stop there. Some were locked in iron cages and left to starve on display at city gates. Their slow deaths serving as a living demonstration of the futility of resistance. Perhaps the darkest and most chilling fate was reserved for the women who bore children of fallen leaders. The Ottomans feared bloodlines and the possibility that a son of a defeated commander might one day rise to reclaim his father's name. So, they cut the lineage at its root. Infants were torn from their mothers, sold, or executed. A mother forced to watch the killing of her child understood immediately. The empire would not allow even the shadow of resistance to survive. For others, the torture was purely psychological. Ottoman officers forced women to choose which of their children would be spared and which would be killed, a choice designed to shatter their loyalty and humanity forever. Some were kept alive only to witness the execution of their entire families. Their lives prolonged so their suffering could be savored, and all of this was written down, meticulously documented, like accountants tallying profits as proof of power. The cruelty escalated because it worked. Fear traveled faster than armies, causing cities to surrender, not because their walls collapsed, but because word spread of what awaited the women inside. The Ottomans didn't need to fight every battle. Sometimes, the screams of the conquered were enough to force the next city to open its gates. This was conquest by terror. This system reshaped entire societies across the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, gutting communities of their women and permanently warping the population balance. This was demographic warfare, extermination by removal, and the scars lasted for centuries. Survivors who escaped carried their trauma for life. Some could no longer speak their native tongue after years of forced assimilation, and many were rejected by their own families who saw them as tainted. They returned home as strangers, living evidence of what conquest had done to them. Historians once focused on the grandeur of the Ottoman Empire, its military victories, architecture, and administration. But hidden in the archives, meticulously catalogued by imperial scribes, were the receipts of human lives, ledgers filled with the suffering of women whose names were erased. For centuries, their voices were ignored, buried under the myths of empire. The empire did not consider this cruelty a crime. It was law. Every act, branding, public humiliation, forced conversion, enslavement, was legitimized through doctrine and bureaucracy. The system was not rogue violence. It was sanctioned, organized, and legal. This meant the destruction of these women was not just tolerated. It was celebrated as order, as civilization, as empire. The story of these women doesn't end in the 16th century. It echoes through time. The Ottoman system became a template for other empires, a model of how a state can strip away humanity while wearing the mask of civilization. Cannon fire destroyed walls, but bureaucracy destroyed lives. One erased stone, the other erased identity. And yet, there's still one haunting question history never fully answers. What became of the ones who were completely erased? The women who vanished into silence, into unmarked graves, into archives without names. Their stories are not written. Their fates are not known. And this is why the history of what the Ottomans did to the wives of defeated warriors still echoes today. Not because of how they lived, but because of how completely they were erased.